All right, hi everyone. So today we're going to be talking about 4 different simple Java tasks to do. This is part of pre-lab for Lab B in EECS 1021. So I'm going to show you how to do this with both IntelliJ and with jShell. And here in IntelliJ, what we're doing is we're setting up the class, and then we're going to put a main method or a main function inside using all the shortcuts that IntelliJ provides us with. So main and sout, etc. Let's just do a little test right here. So compile, and we're going to run it, and we'll see that the print statement appears in the console, just like that. Fantastic. So we're just testing out our tools. Now we're going to move on to task 1. So in the bottom left-hand corner, you can see task 1 is described in the Word document. All right. And so what we're setting up right now is an array. And we're going to fill that array with a bunch of numbers. And then we're going to make another array and fill it with a bunch of numbers. And then we're going to add each of the elements in each of these arrays to one another. So the first element to the first element in the second array, etc. And we're going to basically create sort of 10 different additions, one element at a time in here. Okay, so now we're going to go into jShell, and we're going to see sort of a live view of this information. All right, so you can see that I filled in array number 1 and in jShell array number 2. So array and array 1 have been filled up. And I'm taking a look at individual elements inside of each of the arrays. And jShell is really nice this way because you don't have to set up the class or the method or anything like that in order to see what's going on. So you can see all of these different values. If I subtract or add one element from one array to another, we can see how this is all done. And if there's a problem with trying to address something in one of the arrays, if I use an index of -1, you can see that doesn't work very well. You get an exception, basically an error. Okay, so jShell is really good for practicing little concepts before I commit to it in IntelliJ. So now what I need to do is iterate through the arrays using a loop. That's what I'm going to do next as part of task 1. So when we iterate through, we typically mean we're using a loop. So in this case, I can use a for loop. And IntelliJ is really nice for showing me hints as to how I should be doing things. So with the for structure, I use the keyword for, then parentheses, and I put some semicolons inside of the parentheses. And then the body of the for loop is inside of the curly braces. So right now, I need to set up my index in the for loop. So int I, so I'm going to set it to 0. I'm going to initialize it to 0. So it's got a starting condition of 0. So int I is equal to 0. And then I need to say for how long I'm going to run this loop for. So what is the end condition? And it's going to be I is less than something. Well, what would that something be? Well, it should be based on the length of these arrays that I'm adding together. So I do array dot, and then I see some options like length. So it will get me the length of the array. And this is similar to what we would have done in something like MATLAB. Okay? So the array is has characteristics associated with it. And just like objects in real life have characteristics, like color and size and things like that, in this case, I can get the length out of the array. Next up, I'm going to print out something about the array just to see what's going on. Okay, so I'm going to go system out print line, or I can do system out print. I'm going to show how I can add 2 elements, one from each array, and I'm going to add a space to it. So it prints out one addition at a time and then puts a space beside it so that we get everything on the same line. There we go, just like that. You can see that in jShell. Now I'm going to compile it and run it inside of IntelliJ. There we go. So we have the preview in jShell and we confirm it with IntelliJ. So every combination of addition ends up as an 11 in that example. All right, next example, task 2. Read input and sum integers. So I got my jShell, I've got IntelliJ, and I've got the instructions in the bottom left. All right. So here I'm going to be scanning input from the user. So var sc is equal to new scanner system.in. So we're taking input using basically system resources, okay, system features. So I set it up once in jShell using the instructions from the lab activity. Now I'm going to do it in IntelliJ. So I've got everything in a package in IntelliJ called EECS 1021, and I set up my class and then set up my main method or my main function. All right, so inside we're going to do the same thing. Var sc is equal to new scanner, and you can see that IntelliJ will prompt me for the library that needs to be brought in when I use scanner, which is great. Sometimes you can use the key presses to do it. Sometimes you just wait for it to prompt and give you a menu option. Sometimes it'll do it automatically. It's just trying to help out. So var sc is equal to new scanner system in. And then var line is equal to. And here what I want to do is take the sc variable or sc object, and I want to interpret the information that's going to come in from the user. So I'm going to use next line, the next line method. You can see the parentheses there, that means it's a method. And I want to take whatever comes in on that next line and put it into the variable called line, which is automatically made into a string. All right, so var line is equal to sc next line, and in jShell you can see now it's waiting for input from the user. So I'm going to type in some information. I typed in, just enter, and it shows that, well, there's nothing, right? So let's try it again. Let's put in some numbers this time. 1, 2, 3, 4. And so it creates a string 1, 2, 3, 4. So we can see that that works. So the user input is going to be taken as a string, and we'll save it into the variable called line. Now we got to take it apart though. Okay, we got to split up the user input. How do we do that? Well, typically you'd want to go and take a look at a help page about scanning to see what your options are. Let's take a look right here. All right, so you can see var line array, which is going to be a string, is equal to line dot, and we can see that we can use the split method. It's going to split the string into pieces based on a delimiter space. Okay, so we put quotation mark, with a space in between. It'll break it up based on the spaces. All right, let's take a look at what happens in jShell. So we're going to make my line array variable in jShell. So var line array is equal to line split, or line dot split, with a space as the thing I'm searching for. And we can see that line array is now filled with 4, in this case, different strings, 1, 2, 3, and 4. These aren't numbers, they're strings. We have to interpret them differently if we want to deal with them as numbers. Basically, we can split it up this way. So we've got basically an array of strings. And now we can iterate through a loop and deal with it if we want to. So here's my for loop. I'm filling in the conditions for how the for loop is going to run with an index I that starts at 0. And the condition for looping through is going to be based on the length of line array. So I is less than line array dot length. And we're going to go and iterate through I is equal to I plus 1. So every time we go through, we increase I. All right, back in jShell. What we need to do here is we need to figure out what we're going to do inside the for loop. Well, we probably want to have a variable that gets changed every time we go through the for loop. So let's make an integer here. We'll call it total or my total. And it could be an integer, it could be a var. So we could either explicitly say that it's an integer, or we could let Java determine on its own if we use var right there. I'm going to set it explicitly as an integer. Okay, so my total, every time we go through the loop, my total is equal to, and what should I do here? We're going to be accumulating the value of my total. So we do my total is equal to my total plus line array. And what's the index in this array? Well, it's I, because I changes every time we go through the for loop. So I is the index. Now, problem is that line array is a string, and we can't add a string to an integer. So what do we do? Well, there's a handy little feature or function or helper option here that we can use. We go integer dot parse int. So we'll parse the string to create integers. It's a little bit like string to num in MATLAB. So parse int line array I. All right, so that's going to convert your string into an integer. All right, so this is getting a little complicated. Let's see what happens inside of. Let's test it out. We'll try it out inside of jShell. So here's my integer in jShell. It initializes to 0, and let's try something out here. So I got a temporary variable called temp. Set it to 0. So what happens with this integer.parseInt? Let's feed it a string. Let's see how it works. So we're going to feed it a string like this, string 2. And it converts it into an integer. You can see that right there in jShell. Fantastic. So that's going to work. Let's copy and paste and put that into jShell and see what happens. And my total is 0. That doesn't make sense. What's going on? My total should have changed. Let's explore a little bit. jShell is good for exploring. All right, so line array does have the contents, these 4 different strings from before. So what's going on? Let's investigate this a little bit. Think. So if we go integer parse int line array, did that work? Let's take a look. Yeah. It's able to parse out the different values inside of line array. So the string gets converted into integers. Yeah, that's all working. So why is it I didn't get a value like I expected out of that for loop? Maybe we can just test my total again. That's right. There you go. I just had to type it in, and it's actually got the value that I was looking for. It did do the addition. It just didn't print it out and confirm it after my total was initialized. So really what I saw was the initialization of line 15 in IntelliJ. That's what happened. I just need to confirm the value by just typing in the name of the variable. And here we're going to do it inside of IntelliJ. We're going to print out the end result just to confirm everything's good. All right, so we're going to run it. Oh, we have to type in some numbers. Right, 4, 5, 6, 7, and the addition's 22. That is correct. It's all worked out. All right, so we're moving on to task number 3, conditional switch on a variable. So we can do conditional statements with if-else, but we can also do it with switch case. So we're going to set up this flag that we use to drive the switch case statement. We're going to call it flag, and we're going to set it initially to a value of A. And A is a character, okay, not a string because it's got single quotes. So it's a character, and it's set, and we can print it, and you can see it's A. That's fantastic. Okay, so now we're going to move over to IntelliJ. We set up our class called prelab. We set up our main method or main function this way, and we're going to set up our flag. All right, so that's done. Now we need to do a decision based on that flag, and that's basically a conditional statement, and we're going to use switch case to do that. And there are different ways of doing switch cases. There's been an update in Java to how we do switch cases that helps make it more not impervious to errors, but more robust to errors. So here it is. We're going to be switching on the flag variable, and we're going to assign a value x to the output of this switch case. All right, so var x is the output, and we're switching on flag, and depending on the flag value, in this case a, then we assign x to a value of 1, or we say that there's an exception, an error. And so this is the default condition. We always need to put a default, or we always should put a default condition in. And instead of printing a statement out, we're going to tell Java that there's an error by throwing an illegal argument exception. Okay. There are lots of different types of exceptions. In this case, we want the argument to be declared as being wrong. Okay. So we have 5 different cases, A, B, C, D, and default. Forgot to put a semicolon right there, but IntelliJ prompted us. I'm going to copy that. I'm going to put it into jShell. And we can see the output here of x is 1 because the flag was A. So let's try different flags. Let's set it to what, C? Okay, so flag is C. Let's run that conditional statement again. We should get 3 as an output to x, or an assignment to x. Good, that worked. Now if I put F in, what happens? I should get an exception. There we go, we got the exception right there. Okay, so being able to generate errors or exceptions is really important. All right, here we go. We're going to run it. We didn't print anything out, so we got to print something out. We got to print out the value in IntelliJ so we can actually see the output, which is kind of an advantage of jShell. So we're going to do that here. So we're going to say the result is, and we're going to do a plus x like that. That's how we're going to print out to the screen. And it printed out. Excellent, that worked. Wonderful. All right, next up, task 4. Let's fill a matrix using a loop, using a for loop. All right, so I got jShell. I'm going to set up my IntelliJ, where I've got my prelab class and my main method. So var mat is equal to a new integer. And I'm going to specify the size of that matrix or array, like that. So I got 5 elements in there. And you can see in jShell when it gets initialized and filling it with zeros, which is good. And now I'm going to fill it in with a pattern 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, which is basically you have an index and you multiply it by 2, where your index starts at 0. Okay, so 0, 2, 4, 6, 8. So let's set up our for loop. So for, you can see there are different for loops in there. We're just going to use the classic traditional one. So we're going to set up our structure for the for loop, and then we're going to fill it in. It's often a good idea to set up your structure and then fill it in afterwards so you don't miss a semicolon or a parenthesis or something. So inside of the body of the for loop, we do mat with an index of I, and we say is equal to I times 2, and then we initialize the variable here in the for loop header. So I is equal to 0. Then we're going to iterate I is equal to I plus 1 or I plus plus. And in the middle, right there, we set up the condition based on the length. We continue until we hit the length of the matrix mat. Okay. And then we're going to do a system out. Actually, we're going to remove the line, the ln. We're just going to do a system out print like that. And then we're going to take the output, or the individual variable from the matrix, and we're going to add a space to it, and that will make a single line with all the contents of mat. All right, so we're going to copy and paste into jShell and see what the output is. But we don't need the system out print line, because jShell will give us, or we should be able to get the value of what mat is afterwards. All right, just like that. Enter. Nothing came out right. I have to actually type in the word mat. There you go. There's the contents of the variable mat. 02468. Fantastic. Let's compile in jShell and run it. There we go. That worked. Fantastic. Let's just make sure that it actually did work. I'm going to change the equation right here to I times 3. So it should be 0, 3, etc. 0, 3, 6, 9, 12. That worked. Fantastic. And there you have it.